Re-recording, we're good? Yes, we're good to go. Hi, everyone, welcome. Today's a pleasure to have with us Professor Jesus Fernandez-Villaverde from the University of Pennsylvania, where he's in the econ department, primarily working on macroeconomics, but also would work on monetary policy, economic history, and political economy. He's also the director of the Penn Initiative for the Study of Markets. So today he's going to be talking to us about his work on cryptocurrencies and fintech. Jesus, thanks for joining us. Pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me here. So let me share my slides and hopefully you can see all of those. So I have been working on cryptocurrencies, central bank digital currencies, payment systems for a few years now. So I thought that instead of giving a very concrete paper, it would be a good idea to, oops, it says the sound is not working properly. Does it sound now? Does it work now, Carlos?
I can hear you well.
Okay.
Let me see, the folks in the audience, can you now hear us? You can type in the chat if you cannot. Okay. All right, we're good.
Very good. Thank you. So I was saying that I have been working on issues related with cryptocurrencies, central bank digital currencies, and fintech now for maybe 5-6 years. So I thought instead of presenting one paper or one particular area of my research, it will be more fun for everyone if I give you an overview of what I think I have learned over the years. So I will say that in any given day, all of you are going to hear about cryptocurrencies, central bank digital currencies, the blockchain and distributed ledgers, tokenization, smart contracts, fintech, etc. And in fact, you can even encounter all these new developments in your daily life. So I really find this photograph very interesting. And this is a person begging for money in China. And you can see that he actually accepts electronic payments. And he has this card issued by the government, by the city, and you can pay with your iPhone. And I was in China maybe 3 years ago, and I didn't use cash any single day of my whole stay. I pay absolutely everything, even when I went to the street and got food from the food trucks using my mobile phone. So in some sense, this has already changed the way we think about life and the way we want to deal with them. Now, there are many, many ways in which one can think about this type of developments. If you are from computer science, you may want to think about them from the perspective of the coding and issues that involve with it. If you are from finance, you may think about, what are the consequences this will have from the financial markets. I am a monetary economist. I work maybe in macroeconomics. So today I'm going to tell you about some issues related with monetary economics, with what sometimes is known as positive economics, and also with issues related with policy advising, both in terms of national and global issues. Of course, this doesn't mean that all the other perspectives are not useful. Of course, they are very, very useful. It's just that, I'm going to focus on what I think I understand a little bit better. Also, of course, a fair treatment of all these topics will require, at the very least, a whole semester. So I will be extremely selective in my discussion today, and there's going to be a lot of very important topics that I will not have time to discuss. And if you want later at the end in the Q&A, we can enter into some of those topics that we are leaving on the side. So what type of papers you may want to have in mind if you want to read a little bit more? I really like this paper. It's on my webpage. Just put my name on Google and you will land on my webpage directly. But Cryptocurrencies, a crash course on digital monetary economics, I think is a very nice and sharp paper because kind of summarizes a lot of the ideas in ways that I think anyone can follow. For sure, any undergraduate in economics can follow them without any problem. Some of the other papers that I list below may be a little bit more challenging to read. But if you are a researcher, if you're a graduate student, if you're a faculty member, certainly you can check those as well. So what I'm going to try to do is the following. I will try to first tell you a little bit why money is memory, and in particular, why this is the right way to think about private currencies. I don't think I will have time to enter into the coda on blockchain, except perhaps in the Q&As. And if time permits, I will have also some ideas about central bank digital currencies, and I will try to offer some concluding remarks. So what do I mean when I say that money is memory? Well, why do we use money? Money is one of the most remarkable inventions of humanity. And the reason for that is because it helps us to achieve division of labor. In any social group, as soon as you have maybe 3 or 4 persons, even in a household, we constantly divide labor. In fact, there is even evidence that among our relatives in the animal kingdom, among apes, division of labor within social groups is also quite prevalent. And there are many reasons for that: specialization, comparative advantage, you name it. But once we have division of labor in any society, nearly by implication, we face a double coincidence of one's problem. So what is the double coincidence of one's problem is, well, I teach, for instance, at Penn, global economic history. This is a popular class, it's an elective, but yet many students want to enroll on it. But unfortunately, students want to take this class, and I'm happy to teach them, but most of them do not really produce anything that I want. I guess that, I could have some of them come and help me with my research, but by and large, I don't really have a task to assign to the 60 or 70 students that take my class every semester. In comparison, I really, really like milk, and I would like to be able to buy milk so I can have milk with my breakfast. And moreover, not only I want to buy milk, but I probably want to buy milk days that I'm not teaching my undergraduate class. That means we have a double coincidence of ones, both in terms of the goods. So my undergrads want to take my class, and I want to take milk, I want to buy milk, but we want to do it in different moments in time. So it's a temporal problem of double coincidence of ones. That basically means that barter is not really a realistic solution, except in a few exceptional cases. Any social group that, as I was mentioning before, gets to some very bare minimum of sites needs to solve this double coincidence of one's problem. And the way economists talk about this, using the normal terminology in economics, is that trade is subject to frictions. And moreover, that these frictions are essential. Are essential because they are part of the environment. They are part of the fact that I specialize in producing some goods, but the goods I demand are different. And the task of every society is come up with ways that will allow us to get around these essential frictions. Okay? So how could we do it? Well, we could do this by a central planner. It works in small groups. So a family, think about my household. Once I finish giving this talk and the Q&A, I will probably have dinner. And, dinner has been produced by one of the members of my household, and we will sit together for dinner. And the central planner in the household is going to allocate dinner. We are not going to engage in any specific trade. That can even be applied to a small hunter-gatherer band. The experience and the evidence from anthropology is that this works perhaps up to 25 people. But this cannot be scaled up to the size of a society. And this is an informational problem that was at the very core of why the experience of the Soviet Union and the other centrally planned economies in the 20th century was so highly disappointing. And by the way, if you want, we can talk more about this because I also have written papers about it. No, artificial intelligence will never fix this problem because the problem is about eliciting information, not about processing the information once it has been generated. So even with the best possible computers in the world, we are still going to have the problem that a central planner cannot solve the double coincidence of one's problem. In economics, we have something called a centralized market a la Arrow de Bro. And basically the idea over here is that we imagine an hypothetical situation where all agents in the economy get together into a central location, and then we are going to engage in trading. And the trading will be done simultaneously with some type of Walrasian auctioneer that will clear all the markets. And this is actually a very nice way to think about many problems in economics, but it is not realistic. The logistic cost will be just too high. Just imagine the cost of putting 330 million Americans in the same room or even through computers at the same time. And moreover, the transactions, since they will involve differences in time, I will teach my class today, but I will only get my meal tomorrow, will be subject to problems of enforceability. How you can actually enforce that different people can implement the contracts in the way they are supposed to implement them to fulfill their contractual obligations. A third possibility is to keep a ledger. And in that way, each of us, each of the members of the society will write in this ledger what they produce or the transfers they get from someone else as positive balances in the ledger, and their consumption or the negative transfers as negative balances. And this actually can work. Think about a gigantic Excel file. This was my experience on a spring break trip when I was in college. It was like 5 friends, and we went to a nice trip. And since I guess that at that moment it was already obvious that I was the person in the group most keenly interested in monetary issues, they made me the ledger keeper of the group. Everyone gave me money. And then I just have basically a small notebook where I will write what people were putting in, what people were getting out. And at the end of the trip, I just clear the balances. Now, the problem of this is scalability. I can keep a notebook with 5 people. These days with Excel, I will be able to keep it maybe for a few thousand people. But at the end of the day, having an Excel file for the transactions of 330 million Americans will be just too difficult. The problem of scalability is going to be a first order consideration. Nonetheless, there may be an intuition here that we may be able to exploit, which is, can we somehow build a layer in society that works a little bit better? And this is just an example of a ledger, and basically kind to try to do this thing. Well, the first thing you will realize when you are running a ledger is that quite often you don't need all the information in the ledger. In particular, if we are willing to accept something that is known as finality, we only need to keep the current balance in the ledger. That is, if the only thing that we care is how many positive balances or negative balances I have in the ledger, and we don't care if those balances come from some transactions in some form or another a few weeks or a few months ago, and that it means that they are final, that's the finality aspect of my discussion, then I only need to keep track of the balance. And that actually simplifies the problem dramatically. Why it simplifies the problem dramatically? Well, because instead of having a gigantic ledger with every single entry, I only need to keep the balance at that moment. Okay, so that means that maybe a ledger can work. Well, but how do we actually implement that ledger? How do we actually implement this before the arrival of modern computers and spreadsheets like Excel? Well, societies have done sometimes this as balance of gifts, and we still do that. I don't know if that's still the case among younger people, but I remember that when I was in college, we will go out for, to a bar, and we will have a balance of gifts that was basically, I will go and pay this round of beer, and then, in the next round, someone else will pay for it. And since we were a relatively small group, it was relatively easy to keep track of who have paid for what, and that at the end of the day, more or less everyone had contributed in an equitable way to the evening. But we can do this in terms of tokens, and that's where money comes from. So think about a token, and a token can be anything you can imagine. It can be a shell, it can be a ray stone, like the traditional money employed in the Yap Islands, so this gigantic piece of stone. It can be a piece of paper, or it can be an electronic annotation. So what does it mean that I'm giving you a token? The amount of tokens that you have in your pocket or in the case that they are an electronic annotation in the memory of a computer, represent your net balance in the society ledger. I go to Penn and I teach my class. Then Penn, at the end of the month, pays me a lot of tokens. I take those tokens, which are just green pieces of paper, or the electronic representations of those green pieces of paper, and I go to my favorite supermarket, I buy my favorite bottle of milk, and I give those tokens. And the net balance of my tokens is just what we need to implement this decentralized ledger that I was referring before, where we keep track of what people have done and not done for society. Now, at this moment, you will realize two important things. First, that the material that is used to build the token or the particular form of the token is somewhat irrelevant. The token can be a disk of gold, what we will call a traditional coin, or it can be the traditional money used in the Yap Island. Interestingly, the only thing that we need to do is understand what our net balance of tokens is. And there is a very nice story about the Rai stone. Apparently, one of the stones got sunk when it was being moved from one island to the other. But as long as I can tell you, hey, if I do this for you, you will give me the transfer of that token, even if it is underwater, and everyone else in society accepts it, it is functionally equivalent of transferring an electronic money in the current financial system. So the way you can think about money, these tokens, is nothing more than an informationally efficient way to run a decentralized ledger. Moreover, you can do it without a central bookkeeper. That's great because it means we don't need to have trust on this centralized bookkeeper, and because it can be a scale up. And that's why very soon societies around 3,000 years ago or 2,500 years ago, all across the globe, in ancient Greece, in ancient Egypt, in ancient China, in ancient India, very soon move into having this type of decentralized token systems as soon as their economic life reach some very basic level of complexity. But if that token is keeping track of what you have done for society and what you have got out of society, what you can think is that money is nothing else but the memory of society. Okay? So in the memory of society, what if you open your wallet and look at the dollars, that's what, in some sense you have done for society. It can be that you have done it yourself. It can be that someone else that has done something for society has given it to you. Now, when I use the words have done for society, I don't imply any sense of fairness. Maybe what you have done for society, quote unquote, is to take resources from someone else against their will. And that's the problem why we try to have a legal system that tries to minimize those problems, like me stealing your coins. But what is really remarkable from my impression is the degree to which we have really been able to create this enormously efficient system. So let me then introduce what I always call my working definition of money. One, because of the division of labor, we need to trade among us. Since trade through barter is unfeasible, in particular intertemporal trade, we need to come up with ways to have some type of decentralized net balance ledger system. Since the system that we have more often come up with is through tokens, we call these tokens money. And that's why money is nothing more than an informationally efficient record-keeping mechanism that allows for decentralized trading under essential frictions. And the great thing about this working definition of money is that then it really helps you, as I was highlighting, to understand a lot of things that otherwise look very disparate. That's the great thing about abstraction. In this definition, money is a medium of exchange and a store of value. But they are not necessarily a unit of account. For instance, traditionally in France, in the 16th and 17th and 18th century, accounting was done in livre tournois, but the livre tournois did not exist as a coin or as a token. This is an IOU from some bank to someone. This is a bearing payment note to whoever is sporting it, is holding it at this moment, expressed in this type of livre tournois that I was mentioning before, and yet it didn't exist as physical tokens. And that also tells you that many different assets can bring themselves different degrees of moneyness. So we tend to think about money as a noun. Think about grammar. We use money as a noun. Money is or money is not. But really, you may want to think about money as an adjective. There are different tokens, there are different assets that may help us to implement this decentralized ledger that I was referring before, and those different degrees of moneyness are what index different type of assets. So let me give you a very simple example. So when I was a small kid, I'm from Spain originally, soccer cards. So basically you will go to your local shop, you will pay a little bit of money and they will send you an envelope with 5 of these soccer cards, and there will be people playing. And this is actually one of my soccer cards, and it's actually the guy who was at the end my favorite. He was a forward. He was called Carlos Santillana. He played for Real Madrid, you can say here, 1984, 1985, which I'm afraid in the notes I'm starting to get old. Well, it happened to be the case that in my school, as in many other primary schools across Spain, these cards very quickly became tokens, and we use them to implement the centralized trade. So let me give you a very simple example. We go at lunch to the canteen, to the school cafeteria, and today they have, let's say, ice cream. And I really, really like ice cream as a dessert. So I will pay 2 or 3 of these cards to my friend Carlos, and Carlos, who prefer the cards to the ice cream, will give me his ice cream. I'm doing something for quote-unquote society, in this case, the community of kids in my class, and the way I'm paying my debts to society is by transferring my soccer cards. 2 days later, maybe Carlos wanted something for me, and he will pay me back some cards. And there was all these cards floating around that play exactly the same role that money played at the time. And that means that society can come up with many, many different types of money. Some of them are going to be government issue, like the dollar you have in your wallets, but many others are not, like the soccer cards when I was a small kid. Also, and this is a very important consideration that you want to keep in mind, is that whoever says money says trade frictions. Money exists because trade is difficult. But that also implies that by default, we cannot assume the welfare theorems that we often assume in economics, because welfare theorems are predicated on trade not being subject to important frictions. And in particular, we are not going to be able to expect the existence of a unique monetary equilibrium or any type of efficiency. Well, but once I have convinced you that we can think about money as this memory in society, and that money is organized in terms of tokens, there are a lot of questions to ask. Who should issue the tokens? Should the tokens be issued by the federal government, as it occurs in the United States right now? Or should the tokens be issued by private entrepreneurs? What is the form of the token? Should the token be intrinsically worthless, like a piece of green paper? Or it should incorporate some value, such as a precious metal? In fact, for most of humanity, we use precious metals as tokens. In what denominations? How we make it durable and easy to store and transport? How do we guarantee that it's readily recognized and not a forgery? Who receives the initial endowment of tokens in the society? How many tokens are socially optimal? And when should we issue these tokens? Well, notice that nothing that I have said so far requires money to be issued by a government. In fact, money started as being private, as commodity monies. We know from the historical evidence that what occurred is that people started using different commodities to accomplish transactions, and that it was only after those commodities had become monies that governments start, for instance, to stamp them with some type of seal to get some seigniorage and to provide services such as recognition. Coinage was only taken over by the government later in the development of money. And you can think about current government money, nothing more than a console that is an infinite-lived bond with a zero nominal coupon. Why is that? Because you can think about the green papers that you have in your wallet as the ways in which you can discharge your obligations to the federal government. In particular, all of us need to pay taxes, and the ways that the federal government and most state and local governments require us to pay your taxes is in terms of the government money. Okay? And by the way, that motivates the fiscal theory of the price level, but let me skip that. Now, it also highlights a couple of interesting ideas, like, for instance, the Swiss dinar. So let me elaborate a little bit on those. So when societies, you will think about this idea of monies being issued by private parties as something that, maybe happened in Babylon 2,500 years ago, but it's not something that is happening today. I will say no. These are called peyofas, and they were from, in the north of Spain, La Seu d'Urgell and Peramola. And basically what happened was that in many rural areas in Spain, as late as the 19th century, there was not enough government issue money, because minting money when you had to use precious metals was costly for governments, and governments will not have a lot of incentive to mint small denominations. This is what François Abel and Tom Sargent have called the big problem of a small change. So what happened was that in a lot of the small towns, some prominent member of society, like maybe the local priest or a local merchant, will just literally pick a piece of this cardboard or some other material and put his name and put some denomination, and this will circulate. And we have plenty of evidence of these coins circulating as late as the late 19th century. So if I were back and will talk with my grandmother, she may remember actually using this type of private monies. So private monies have actually existed all over the history. And as I was mentioning before, soccer cards were in some sense a form of money. This is beautiful. This is the famous case of the Swiss dinar. So what happened with the Swiss dinar is as follows. Before the first Gulf War, the invasion of Kuwait by Iraq and kicking out by the US and its allies, Iraq actually had quite a stable currency. You see over here Saddam Hussein, and it had been printed in Switzerland. And because of that, they were known as the Swiss dinars, because they have been printed in Switzerland. Well, after the first Gulf War, of course, Saddam Hussein is not kicked out of power, but he's in such a dire economic situation that he starts inflating the currency. And in particular, starts issuing new dinars that are printed in Iraq, not in Switzerland because of economic sanctions, and they are very easily recognizable. And what will happen is that people in Iraq, especially in Kurdistan in the north, will start trading in the old dinars, in the old Swiss dinars. Why? Because the supply of those dinars were stable. In fact, there were none of them being printed anymore, and they became much better tokens than the tokens issued by the government. In fact, the government will punish you if they saw you trying to use those Swiss dinars. And again, that illustrates the way in which society tried to get around the different problems of coming up with tokens, and the fact that it doesn't need to be done by governments. Okay, so finally, after that relatively long introduction, or miss in a sense, I can get to the core of what I want to tell you today. How we organize these tokens, whether we let these tokens being run by the government or by private institutions, has been keenly determined by technology. Okay, for instance, the minting technology, the fact that we learn to hammer coinage, or that we have mill coinage, or that we have industrial coinage, allow the proliferation of coins. You could not have paper money without paper. It kind of makes sense. Okay, even the invention of writing. In fact, some people, this is one of the very best, one of the very first tablets from Babylon, from Mesopotamia, that you can see the very first entries over here of written language. Those were most likely directed at having tokens of exchange. And you can tell in some of those that actually what you are recording over here are transactions with the temple. The economic life of Mesopotamia was organized around temples. And this is nothing more than money. This is a ledger from 5,000 years ago. Okay. So in that sense, the arrival of cryptocurrencies is not new. I know that people think that, oh no, cryptocurrencies, IT technology, how exciting is this? And of course it's exciting. But if you are familiar with monetary history, you realize that this is something that has been happening for 5,000 years. We come up with a new technology, for whatever the reason we come up with a new technology, and that means that we have a new way to organize tokens. And that will help us to think, do we want to keep those tokens? Do we want to keep the same system of tokens that we had from before? And what are the three main new ideas that come from these cryptocurrencies? What has been the technological breakthroughs that we have had over the last 10, 15 years? First of all, is that computer networks have changed the logistics of distribution of private monies. It was very costly, and it is still today very costly, to distribute physical money. Around 20-something years ago, Europe switched from the national currencies into the euro. Logistically, this was a tremendous effort, because you had to collect every single coin and every single note in Europe and substitute it by the new euro coins and the new euro notes. That cost was in the billions of dollars. But today, you don't need any of that. You just need to download an app into your iPhone or into your computer, and we can distribute as many of these tokens in electronic form as we want to have. Now, I highlighted before the problem involved in avoiding counterfeiting and overissuing of money. Well, that turns out to be the case that thanks to the modern cryptographic techniques, I'm not going to bore you about it, but basically this is the elliptic curve at the very core of Bitcoin, which is basically, the idea is to come up with mathematical operations that are very easy to do in one direction, like starting over here, but very difficult to do in the previous direction. We can actually have reasonable safety in coming up with ways to keep track of all these electronic tokens. And moreover, we can automatically implement contingent contracts. Sometimes these are known as smart contracts. So by that I mean, if the weather in Miami, as measured by the AP News Wire service on, let's say, March 31st, 2022, is above 55 degrees, then I will pay Carlos $52. And people get very excited because this type of contingent contracts allow us to implement a lot of trades, a lot of exchanges that right now are very difficult because we don't trust each other. Who knows where Carlos will be in 2 years if he doesn't have a contract like that? That's, by the way, why we have escrow contracts. Every time you buy a house, you need to put some money on escrow precisely to avoid defaulting on the contract. So maybe through contingent contracts, we can get rid of escrows, and then implement many, many other ideas. And people realized that these cryptocurrencies were feasible. And the person or persons who developed Bitcoin, since we are still not sure who they were, came up with this very, very wonderful system, very technologically sophisticated, which is fully fiduciary. At the end of the day, Bitcoin is even more fiduciary. It's more of a fiat money than the government money. Why? Because as I told you before, I can use the US dollars to pay for my taxes. I cannot use Bitcoin to pay for my taxes. So I think I cannot. I don't know if the regulation has changed. But people quickly imitated. And before we realized, we're in a situation where a few months ago, I guess I didn't check this morning, I should have done that, we had at least 21 cryptocurrencies with market caps over 1 billion. So we are, in some sense, in a very, very peculiar moment in history. For the first time in around 180 years, we have active competition among privately issued currencies. And this had not been the case since the demise of free banking. Free banking existed in Scotland until 1844 and in the United States until 1863. In fact, if any of you travel to Scotland, you will still notice that the banknotes they are going to give you, instead of saying Bank of England, often, because of course the Bank of England notes also circulate in Scotland, often will have the Royal Bank of Scotland PLC, and you will be, oh, what is this? This is kind of funny. Well, this is an inheritance from that. This is not really free banking anymore. This was just a little bit of a concession given to Scottish banks to allow them to still keep those notes for a little while. And, it's interesting. So can we run a different system? And the person who proposed this idea the most strongly already many, many years ago was F.A. Hayek. He wrote in the 1970s a book, a small book that later he made it a little bit longer. It was a small pamphlet that he then built into a book called The Nationalization of Money. Note, however, that I'm citing the 1999 edition by University of Chicago Press, which is the one I will recommend you to read if you are interested, because it includes a lot of extra material, editor's comment, etc. So Hayek's view of the world was as follows. Well, private markets often implement desirable outcomes. I go to my local bakery and I can buy fantastic croissants. These croissants are not supplied by the federal croissant system. They are supplied by Patrick Leoni, my very nice and reliable baker. Why cannot we apply the same intuition to money? Instead of having a Federal Reserve System supply money, why don't we have some type of free banking where these privately issued currencies, which have become suddenly feasible thanks to the innovations in technology, will supply money? And Hayek's conjecture was that privately issued currencies can deliver price stability because it will be in the interest of private issuers to provide a service that is of high quality. And that particular service of high quality will be the stability of money. So the idea again is, just to recap this very long argument, look, we need tokens as a society to achieve decentralized goals. Historically, we have had many examples of private tokens. For a while, we had the government running a monopoly or quasi-monopoly of token issuance. Now that things have changed, due to the arrival of the new technologies, should we revisit the view or views from before, and maybe Hayek's idea of a decentralized money will be feasible. I read Hayek's book when I was an undergraduate. I thought it was very intriguing, but at the time, I felt that the probability that something like that will ever be implemented was close to zero. Interestingly enough, it actually came not because of political action, but because of technological developments, something that I think that Hayek, who always thought about the organic growth of systems in society, will have appreciated. So I actually wrote a model to think about this. What I did was to say, I'm going to take the ideas of Hayek, which is this chap over here in black and white, And I'm going to apply the standard model that monetary economists use these days by Ricardo Lagos, which is this lad over here, and Randy Wright, which is this person over here. So my paper, in some sense, of my investigations for a long time has been when Lagos Wright met Hayek. And then what I say is, does thinking about this vindicate the views of Hayek? And the answer that I get is nuance. So I have a number of questions. Will a system of private money, as the one envisioned by Hayek, deliver price stability? And the tentative answer that we get from our investigation is probably no. And the answer goes at the very key of what I was telling you before. We believe that Patrick, my baker, can deliver great croissants, as in fact he does, because he's getting the right feedback from the market through the price system. We believe in the price system because it's a great way to transmit information. However, I already highlighted that money exists because there are frictions. And a way to think about frictions as sand in the mechanism of the price system. And once you have that sand in the mechanism of the price system, whoever is issuing money is not getting the quote-unquote right signals, and hence we should not expect in general that private money will deliver price stability. And we actually have a proof that that's the case. But we are economists, and we don't care so much about price stability in itself. We want to have the socially optimum amount of money. And in fact, Milton Friedman proved in the famous Friedman rule in the early 1960s that the optimal amount of money does not imply price stability. Actually, Friedman showed that the optimal path for the price level is a slight deflation over time. And then the question is, will the market provide the socially optimum amount of money? And again, because of the same argument linked with the existence of trade frictions, the answer is probably no. Will one currency drive all others from the market? We will have a situation where there is a winner takes all. Or does our model forecast that we will have several of these currencies coexisting along the equilibrium path? And we conclude that long-run competition is likely. And in fact, historical evidence of private money circulating one with each other suggests that the answer is in fact backed by the evidence. Do private monies require a commodity backing, like, for instance, some type of gold standard? And the answer is no. And this is very interesting because, again, it vindicates the position of many of the free banking systems that existed in the 19th century that were not fully backed by commodities. They were only partially backed. And as I was mentioning before, Bitcoin is not backed by any commodity. Can private monies and a government-issued money compete? And the answer is yes, but competition changes what monetary policy can do. And this is where Hayek will be happy. So he may not be that happy about 1 and 2, but he will be happy about this, because what we show is that the threat of having a private money entering into the market will discipline monetary policy in ways that will not be disciplined otherwise. I cannot run the same type of crazy hyperinflations that the Germans ran during the Weimar Republic or Zimbabwe or Venezuela ran if a lot of our agents can switch to a private money. So even if private monies are not a perfect solution, the mere fact that we have private monies, thanks to cryptocurrencies, can be extremely useful in disciplining governments into avoiding the worst temptations that they suffer in terms of abusing their power of issuing money. Are network effects important? Yes, but in subtle ways. And in particular, we show how you can get around, how the market can get around a lot of these network issues. So if your answer of why you believe governments should run money is because of network effects, which, by the way, was my answer and before I brought this paper, then I will say probably not. I think it's much more important the fact that governments, since they are not maximizing profit, but hopefully, or at least theoretically, they could try to maximize the social optimum through fiscal backing, can try to achieve better outcomes than cryptocurrencies. And finally, Are security risks significant? And the answer is yes. And of course, what we have over here is the Goldfinger attacks. So let me finish with this idea because I think it's fun, and then we can enter into the Q&As. So of course, this is a photo from Goldfinger, the famous 007 movie with Sean Connery. I will not even try to pretend I can imitate his Scottish accent. And this is Auric Goldfinger. If you recall the movie, and this is interesting because actually the plot is different than in the novel by Ian Fleming. But in the movie, Auric Goldfinger is having his mint tea over here in his farm in Kentucky, and Sean Connery is asking him, okay, so I just learned you want to break into Fort Knox, but how in the world are you going to take all the gold? It's going to be so heavy and so difficult to transport. And Goldfinger explains that his goal is different, that what he plans to do is detonate a dirty nuclear bomb on Fort Knox that will irradiate the gold store over there, and that will increase the price of his own gold. Of course, the economics of this doesn't make a lot of sense, but let's forget about it for a second. What a Goldfinger attack is an attack where I lose some resources, but I make you lose even more. And by making you lose even more, I end up better off. Yes, taking over Bitcoin or any other type of decentralized network will require quite a lot of money. At this moment, my friends in the industry tell me it will take between 10 to 15 billion dollars. Let's take $15 billion. It's on the upper side. Then once I control 51% of the network, I can push a fork that will destroy the network by completely screwing it up. People will tell me, oh, but you don't want to do that because then you have wasted your $15 billion. Yes, you will have wasted your $15 billion. But imagine that you are North Korea or Iran, and your goal is not to recover your $15 billion investment, but to cripple the US economy. So if I go and I tell the regime in Iran that they can cripple the US economy spending $15 billion, chances are that they may be tempted to take that approach. And I think that many of those who defend cryptocurrencies are not keenly aware of this type of Goldfinger attacks. They're also called 51% attacks. So let me conclude and we go to the Q&As. Cryptocurrencies are extremely interesting, and they have really changed the way we think about monetary economics. I have a nuanced assessment or the value. I think that as private monies, they can do a lot of great things, but we also need to understand they have problems that come directly from monetary economics. There are other problems related with, computer science, etc. But I think, it's really fun and it's really exciting to be in monetary economics right now. Fintech and everything related with that is extremely general, and there is really a lot of things that we can do. Okay. So let me stop and let me allow you some questions.
Yes, so we have at least one question in Q&A here, but if people in the audience want to raise your hand, I can let you speak and ask your question directly, so I don't have to repeat it here. I think Ehud, you had a comment, Ehud. Let's see if Ehud's still here. How do I do this? Megan, I'm not being able to allow people to speak. I mean, am I a host? Can you make me a host?
Yep, let me change that right now. All right, you should be good to go.
Yes. Ehud, do you want to ask a question?
Well, this is a little bit of an amusing question, but let me ask it, Jesus. Since I'm a fan of the James Bond franchise, what was the economics that Goldfinger got wrong?
Well, that the US, basically his idea was that if all the gold in Fort Knox is contaminated by radiation, somehow the price of gold will go up because the non-contaminated gold will be more valuable. But since most gold is not used for industry, is used for monetary transactions, what the US government could still do is sign securities against that gold. And when the radiation level goes below some level, you just transact, you just actually do the physical deliveries. In fact, most of the transactions in gold, the gold never moves. The gold, I don't know if any of you have visited the basement of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. A lot of the gold transactions in the world happen with gold that is on those things, and it never literally moves from the basement. So the only thing you need to do is someone who will say, the gold to the left in L3 now is owned by France. and it used to be owned by Germany. So the US government could still do that. Okay, so that's why I don't think that even if we get our goal with radiation, it will make that much of a difference. But nonetheless, it's a fantastic movie. To me, it's one of the best movies to think about monetary theory. So if I teach monetary economics, I always force the students to watch the movie.
Carlos, can I add one more thing? Or
Please go ahead.
So, Jesus, one of the very first articles I read when I was an undergraduate was the use of cigarettes in POW camps as stores of value.
Yeah.
And so I sort of wanted to remind all of us really,
Yes.
that that's one of the very earliest examples of, I guess, private currencies.
Yes,
They
exactly.
stopped being currency when the camps were liberated.
Yes, so two things about that. So one, and that's the traditional one. I thought that the one using soccer cards was a little bit more healthy, given that current generations are interested in keeping an interesting lifestyle. But let me tell you a very amusing anecdote. When smoking was prohibited in federal prisons, people could not use cigarette money because cigarette money was still used in US federal prisons for many, many decades after World War II. And what people switched was to mackerel. So if you are interested, go to Google and put mackerel money. So apparently in the canteens in federal prisons, they sell this mackerel in pouches. And people really like mackerel because it has a lot of protein. And if you are pumping iron, you are over there in the prison patio, and to pump some iron, eating a lot of extra mackerel is very useful. And the good thing about mackerel, it comes in these sealed pouches that you can trade because they come in homogeneous sizes. So apparently, after eliminating cigarettes, in a very few weeks, mackerel became the money for doing exchange in prisons. I don't know if that's still the case. Fortunately, I've never been in a prison myself. But apparently, you want a haircut, it's 2 pouches of mackerel. You want me to do your cleaning duty, is 1 pouch of mackerel, which again shows every society needs to have a way to keep track of memory. And we are going to come up with tokens no matter what. And then the question is, which type of tokens do we want to come up with, and how the arrival of new technology should force us to rethink about these tokens. Okay, so that's why I really got excited about this, but that's a great question.
Let's see, the audience. Lisa, do you want to ask a question here live, or should I ask you a question? I'll allow you to talk here. Otherwise, I can ask your question, Lisa.
Yeah.
Yeah, do it. Oh, sorry. Yeah, my one question, and it's interesting because as an attorney, I've been studying smart contracts, and and of course, one of the problems with smart contracts is a jurisdictional issue. Like, where do you actually enforce those smart contracts jurisdictionally? But anyway, my real question is, when the government protests this loss of taxation power because it actually manipulates the economy in certain respects, and I could see where governments would really object to not being able to trace flow of funds.
Yes, so 2 things to that. Yes, so first of all, I think that some governments, especially those who abuse seigniorage revenue, are worried about this. My answer is always, look, taxation is about coming with fair and efficient taxes. Inflation tax, which is what you do by manipulating money, is neither fair because it falls disproportionately among those of lower income, nor particularly efficient because it distorts the economy. As economist, I can tell you a lot of taxes that are way fairer and way more efficient than seigniorage money. So if your defense of money, if you are in government and your defense of money, of government money, is because it allows you to tax, I will tell you that's not a very good answer. Okay. Now, if you are telling me that you don't trust the private system because, as I showed you before, the private system is subject to serious problems, that's an answer I can trust. But just worrying about losing money, I will tell you, no, you don't want to do that. The seigniorage is not such a great source of revenue. In terms of keeping track of the flow of funds, here, and since you are a lawyer, you will appreciate this point, we need to do a balance of interest between the right of privacy that I think we all deserve with a legitimate exercise of the police power by the government. So I'm really very worried that whenever I go to China, the Chinese government and the Communist Party is aware of what I had for breakfast. On the other hand, I also know that it is important to fight crime and to fight terrorism and money laundering, to have some activities to allow this for the government to do this type of things. And that, I will say, goes a little bit above my pay grade in the sense that I'm not really an expert on regulation, and I'm not quite sure where that balance of interest, where to draw the line. That's the same with the issue of conflict of jurisdictions. I think that is this type of issues become more and more prevalent. As a global community, we need to make an effort to have global ways to address these issues. We, in some sense, already have a very similar and related problem due to the fact that thanks to technology, it's very easy for Apple to claim they actually run their whole operations from Dublin. Okay, so Apple pretty much everything, or Netflix pretty much everything they do within the European Union, they claim they do it from Dublin and take advantage of the tax breaks that you can get in Ireland. And I think that the answer to this thing is saying, look, the technology has changed the world, and the technology requires having a better global governance.
All right, so I have a question here on the chat. Could you comment on NFTs? And I don't know what NFTs stand for.
NFT, I'm not sure about.
Alejandro, if you can type what do you mean by NFTs? And also, if you would have any comments on the prices currently of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, what do you think of?
So let me start with the prices because that's easy. Bitcoin is a bubble. And what do I mean by a bubble? I'm going to use bubble in the very precise sense in which economists use the word bubble, not in the way the Wall Street Journal uses the word bubble. Bubble for an economist is any asset that is traded at a value above its fundamental, where the fundamental is the real payments that you get from it. The real payments from Bitcoin are zero, or from any other cryptocurrency, well, nearly all of them. I imagine that you could imagine some cryptocurrency that gives you some real payments. Thus, any price of Bitcoin above zero is a bubble in the economic sense. Now, this is not necessarily bad. In fact, one of my favorite questions to my graduate students is to, in the exam, is to give them an exercise where having bubbles is actually positive for the economy. The price that Bitcoin has is because its value as a liquidity service and storage of value. The problem is once you don't have an anchor in terms of fundamentals, there is no way to uniquely pin down an equilibrium value. And you are in general going to be able to find an infinite number of prices, of paths for prices that are compatible with individual optimization and market clearing. And we have actually that theorem in one of my papers. So when people tell me, is Bitcoin too high or too low? I think that the only thing an economist can tell you is, I don't know. I don't know. It's a bubble. It's a bubble in the sense of an economist, not in the sense of the Wall Street Journal. But since this is just a pure liquidity value, 2,000 is too high, 10,000 is too high. I don't know. Coming back to my example before, the price of the Santillana soccer card was one ice cream. Was that too high or was that too low? I don't know. The fact is, at that moment, you could trade one ice cream. When I was in third grade, you could trade one card of Santillana for one ice cream. Was that too high or too low? I don't know.
But isn't that true for any currency? I mean, the dollar doesn't have any particular.
Oh, no. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Because the price level is the inverse of the price of the total outstanding debt of the US government. That's the fiscal theory.
That's the fiscal theory. Okay. Okay.
Yes. And I believe in the fiscal theory of the price level.
Okay.
Sorry for those of you who are not economists, this is a little bit of inside baseball. But basically the view that a lot of economists like me have is that is the fiscal backing of the US government money that pins down its fundamental value. There is no such a thing as a fiscal backing for Bitcoin, and that's why one is the bubble, but the other one is not.
Let's see here. There's I have a question that on that particular, with the technology that we have now, it seems to be that we don't carry dollars, physical dollars anymore. Very. However, we all have tokens of dollars in our bank account. You probably, all of us hold some sort of cash position in our bank account. They're tokens of dollars. And why wouldn't that move to something that bears interest? Because it's so easy to do. Why don't we carry tokens of treasury bills, for example, as a standard means of exchange?
So there are two answers to that. One is, because we need to convince Senate and the House to do that. That's a political issue. There is a counter argument, which is people will get a little bit unhappy with that. Now, personally, I will be in favor of that, and I have been on many papers on the record defending it. And in particular, this is a great way to fight recessions. So let me tell you, if I have just 30 seconds, stay with me because the argument requires 2 steps, so I hope not to lose anyone. As you probably know, the US was for nearly 10 years at the zero lower bound of the interest rates. That limits the ability of the Federal Reserve System of monetary policy to achieve optimal outcomes. Well, the zero lower bound exists because of what I have called in a paper the Tony Soprano technology. I don't know if you remember, in one of the first seasons of The Sopranos, Tony Soprano is storing all his cash in his bins where he has the duck feet. Okay, that basically puts a zero lower bound on the interest rate because I cannot go to negative. People will get all their money and just store it in cash, or maybe a few basis points for the convenience of having electronic money. If the money was fully electronic, then I can implement negative interest rates. And hence, when you have negative interest rates, I can do a lot, monetary policy can do a lot more. And there is nothing magic about positive interest rates. There are moments where I believe in markets, and there are situations where the saving investment market clears at negative prices. And that's only because we tend to think about interest rate in net terms and not in gross terms. So the way I think about a negative interest rate is I give you 1 today and you will give me 0.98 tomorrow. So why is 0.98 something that cannot happen? Okay, very good. So that will be a great way to help monetary policy. And believe it or not, this is an idea that has been implemented in the past. And what happened, I think it was Alberta, during the 1930s, it issued some provincial currency that had coupons. And basically what you had to do is once a month, go to your local bank, which was a fiscal agency of the province of Alberta, they will take out one of the coupons, and then you will not have $1, one Alberta dollar anymore. You will only have 0.99 Alberta dollars. And no one will take the currency if the coupon had not been clipped properly, and you had like a machine from the bank to do this properly, so this was not counterfeiting. This is called the Mulrich, and it's actually a very smart way to achieve a lot of things. And apparently this worked really very, very well in Alberta, and it really helped the economy of Alberta during the Great Depression a lot. So now, instead of having the complicated system, we just can do it with computers, and that will be fantastic. So I'm a big fan of paying interest, either positive or negative, on reserves, on persons' reserves. So on that, I'm a big fan.
Any other question from the audience? If you want to raise your hand. I don't see anybody else here with their hands raised. I have another one, and that has to do with the euro. You mentioned the euro, transition to the euro in your talk. And one thing to think about that as like, well, all these countries that don't necessarily integrate the fiscal policy, giving up and saying our currency now is dictated by this other thing. Could be Ethereum or could be the European Central Bank. Well, you have some control of the European Central Bank, but not. Italy doesn't have all that control, all that much control over it, right? So what have you learned from that experience that you think is sort of that connects and gives us some understanding what's going to happen next year in terms of the ability to forward with that?
So what I will say is someone is asking me for the slides. Let me just give the exact link because they are on my webpage.
And I'll post in our website as well. So.
Very good.
Yep.
So so the way I think about this is as follows. Having the ability to run your own monetary policy is great if you are responsible. Having the ability to run your monetary policy is a terrible idea if you are not responsible. So this is a little bit like you are 16. Should I get the keys of the car from my dad? Well, if you are a sensible 16-year-old kid, that's probably a good idea. If you are not a sensible 16-year-old kid, that's not a bad idea. That's not a good idea. So do I trust Denmark or Sweden to run their fiscal and monetary policy in a sensible way? Yes. Do I trust Spaniards? And in that way, no one can get mad at me. I'm talking about the Spaniards. I'm a Spaniard. Do I trust Spaniards to run their monetary policy in a sensible way? I think that 500 years of evidence suggests that the answer is no. So is Spain worse off because we cannot run our own monetary policy? I'm not so sure. Yes, maybe in 2009, 2010, we would have been better off having our own monetary policy. Maybe we could have done a little bit better job than the ECB. But right now, if we had our own central bank, well, I don't even want to think what will happen. So it's an issue of institutions. And, you know, this semester I'm teaching American economic history, and actually next week we need to go over the Federalist Papers in some detail. And I think that Madison and Hamilton and Jay got that exactly right. You know, the institutional design is a balance of situations given the political economic reality of different countries. And one needs to decide, given the current situation, what is the best way to do things. And I think there are countries that will do a great job running their monetary policy, and there are other countries who are not going to do such a great job.
All right, so I'll end with one more question on just the exact topic of if we take the fiscal theory of money and you look at the responsibility of let's say the US government running their monetary policy for the past, 10, 15 years now and doubling down now, do you worry about the price level eventually?
I worry a little bit. I'm more worried now than 5 years ago. I think that the experience of the last 5 years was that, excuse me, the economy had gone through a tremendous shock of the Great Recession. By 2015, 2016, the economy was doing much better. This was the moment to pay down part of the accumulated debt. And because of the political economy of the country, that didn't happen. So there was 4 years of the economy doing very well, and we didn't pay down the debt. Now we got COVID, and again, there is a very large fiscal stimulus. We can discuss if the stimulus is too large or too small. That's a fine thing. But basically, the way in which I see the US political economy right now is when things go bad, we issue debt. And when things go well, we don't take it back. And that's not the way this works, okay? And, you know, even if you're a 100% Keynesian economist, Keynes made very clear, aggregate demand is for the good and for the bad times. Aggregate demand is management, is about you issue debt and use government expenditure when the economy is in a recession, but that also means that when the economy is expanding, you need to take it back. And I see right now the US, for a number of reasons, and if this was a seminar in political economy, we could discuss it, is not doing that. So that's increasing my concern about the fiscal sustainability of the current budget over the next decade. And yes, that eventually will end up either in higher taxes or higher or lower government spending or higher inflation. Which of these three is going to be remains to be seen. But between you and me, do I think this is a moment where I'm willing to take more nominal debts? Yes.
Indeed. And with that, thank you, Jesus. A wonderful seminar. Thank you, everybody, for